Hey everybody, Trey here, coming at you this morning from Conway, Arkansas, where I am setting up for today's eclipse. We've reached eclipse day at long last, so that should be a fun time here in the next several hours. The eclipse, again, is expected to begin just before 1:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time there in southwest Texas and move across parts of the country over the subsequent couple of hours. So we're going to look at the prospects for cloud cover across the totality path here in just a little bit, now that we have some live satellite data we can analyze. But we also have that severe threat, that multi-day stretch of severe weather that is expected to kick off really today and then move east through the next several days, going into at least Wednesday and Thursday. There have been several changes to the outlook lines since our last video yesterday afternoon, so wanted to do an update this morning going over those changes, and we could see some significant severe weather with this multi-day stretch that we have on tap. But first, let's go ahead and look right away at the visible satellite imagery. This is what we're dealing with right now. I'm recording this right about 9 a.m. Central Daylight Time, so this is the most up-to-date satellite imagery I have at the time of this recording. This look might change a little bit by the time you see this video, but overall, this is what we're dealing with right now. So I'll pause it here, and this is what we have going on. As we talked about for the last couple of videos, we have this batch of cloud cover that is moving into these Gulf Coast states, Texas and Louisiana. That has been forecast pretty well over the last couple of days, last several days, and that is coming to fruition this morning. Now, if we zoom in on this area across Texas into Louisiana, we notice that we do have some breaks in the clouds here in the low levels. These thicker white clouds here are your low-level clouds, and you can see that they are moving pretty rapidly northward. That is on that warm advection ahead of the developing surface low, ahead of our storm system taking shape over the desert southwest. So that is your low-level warm advection, those clouds associated with your low-level warm advection moving off to the north. Then you have your high-level clouds, the cirrus here, that are moving southwest to northeast. So we have quite a bit of cloud cover here across the region, but the good news for this area, this was not really something that we were sure about over the last several days, is that we do see some breaks in these clouds that are advancing northward, especially the low clouds advancing northward across parts of Texas. Now, that is definitely apt to change here over the next several hours as that warm advection really starts to take shape, as that surface low really starts to take shape out here to the west. Again, we'll talk about the overall meteorology here of the severe setup, which will encompass these features here in just a little bit. But overall, we do see perhaps some hope here for the Texas portion of the totality path, in that we do have some breaks in the clouds. Now, there is some thicker cloud cover moving ashore here in the on the southeast Texas coast, so I would suspect that we might see this cloud cover start to get a little bit thicker as we go into the afternoon today, as this warm advection continues. So definitely going to be dicey for areas of North Texas. Still seeing areas of central and southwest Texas maybe having some trouble as this thicker layer of clouds moves in. But here across toward the Red River, southeast Oklahoma, southwest Arkansas, into northeast Texas, including the DFW Metroplex, may have a shot here this early afternoon as the eclipse begins. But, not something we can really predict how this is going to play out, and how those breaks are going to be distributed across the region over in a few hours' time. But looking like we do have a little bit of hope for those regions where the forecast has been a little bit tricky the last few days. Up to the northeast across parts of Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, looking pretty clear at this point. We have that stubborn batch of clouds across the eastern Great Lakes toward western New York, western Pennsylvania that we've been forecasting for the last several days, that the models have really been pinpointing, and that is coming to fruition. That looks to remain pretty stubborn going into this afternoon, so that may hamper eclipse views up there. And then up to the northeast, far northeastern regions of the country, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine looking pretty good at this point. Just some very light high cloud cover there moving from the north into Maine, but that should not really hamper eclipse views at all as we go into this afternoon. Now, we do see this batch of cirrus that is upstream here across the desert southwest. That is going to become probably more widespread as we go into the afternoon. That is associated with the forcing ahead of the digging trough that is going to be setting up over the southwest today into tomorrow, and then eventually ejecting off to the east for the next few days' severe threat. So this batch of cirrus is looking at least decently thick, and that is going to start overspreading regions off to the northeast, and that may start to hamper places like Oklahoma, which most of Oklahoma not in the eclipse path, but far southeast Oklahoma, going to be closer to that low-level cloud cover that they'll have to worry about there. But as far as places like Missouri, northern Arkansas, southern Illinois, and Indiana, maybe even western Ohio, may be starting to experience some of that cirrus as we go into the afternoon today as it starts to overspread the region. So we might be kind of in that sweet spot here, looking in that far southern Missouri to north central and central Arkansas, portion that might be your sweet spot between the low clouds to the south, which are pretty much staying at bay here across the Red River region southward, and that'll probably continue into the afternoon. I don't expect too much northward advance of that low-level cloud deck past that area. So that sweet spot just to the north of that, and then to the south of this potential overspreading cirrus might be there in far southeast Missouri into northern and central Arkansas. So that's why I've set up here in Conway this morning. We do have a little bit of light cirrus outside, but nothing too detrimental to our views of the sun. So setting up here and hoping for the best as we go into this afternoon. Let's check out right now how the models did as far as the cloud forecast goes, so we can get an idea of how the models did. Let's take a look at our tool that we looked at yesterday on the SPC HREF, the High Resolution Ensemble Forecast. So it takes into account basically all of your different convection allowing models, those short-range models that we like to use, and looks at cloud cover at different levels. The blue clouds are low clouds, which are going to be your most detrimental to eclipse viewing. Those are going to be your thicker stratus-type clouds that we're seeing down in Texas this morning. Then you have your mid-level clouds highlighted in green, and then your high-level clouds are your cirrus. And the more vibrant the particular color, the thicker that cloud cover is going to be. So this is what the models from yesterday's 0Z run, so the evening run of the HREF yesterday, how they predicted the cloud cover today. So let's take a look at that. We see quite a bit of high clouds that were predicted from that cirrus plume overspreading the region already across Oklahoma and to Missouri and Arkansas, with a lot of low cloud cover here south of the Red River. And we've seen that pretty much come to fruition this morning. If we go back to our satellite imagery, looking pretty good, although it looks like our cirrus deck here, at least at this point, that view that I just showed you there on this map was valid for 15Z 9 p.m. right as I'm recording this. So looking pretty good, except for the cirrus here that was expected to be overspreading the region is a lot less than what was being predicted yesterday. We do still have some of that light cirrus, as we talked about, here across the region, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, with some back here to the southwest that may be starting to overspread the region here over the next several hours. But overall, models perhaps did a little bit overestimate the cirrus here across this area, which is a good sign based from our videos the last couple of days. The cloud cover might be a little bit less intense than what the models were predicting. They had this band up here in the northeast, eastern Great Lakes here, pretty well nailed down. Lots of high cloud cover here to the east, some cirrus there east of this lower cloud cover in that band. Nailed that pretty solidly there. So overall, pretty good forecast from the models from last night, except for maybe a little bit less cirrus than what was expected across this area. But again, that could change over the coming hours, as this batch of cirrus in the southwest is kind of an unknown at this point and might start becoming a little bit thicker and overspread the area going into the early afternoon. So looking good. Our forecast is looking good here. Again, question marks across parts of Texas there, central and southwest Texas. I suspect that low cloud cover will continue into the afternoon, but we do have some breaks, so we'll have to watch that for folks down by Kerrville. I know that was a hot spot here in the eclipse planning process, so definitely hoping for some breaks in the clouds for you folks down there. Up into the Red River region, southeast Oklahoma, southwest Arkansas, into northeast Texas, including the DFW Metroplex. Definitely some hope this morning with some more breaks in that low-level cloud cover. Again, that could change as we go into the afternoon, but some promising signs this morning as we've gotten some data in that we may see some breaks in the clouds up there, in the low clouds up there going into the afternoon. Then your sweet spot, again, I think is probably going to be that southeast Missouri corridor to northern and central Arkansas, south of that potential overspreading cirrus plume, north of the low cloud cover. So that's why I've set up here in Conway. Then off to the northeast, it'll all hinge on this cirrus plume that it is expected to possibly overspread the region, Missouri into Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, but still looking pretty good there at this point. But we may be dealing with a little bit thicker cirrus up there, but still shouldn't be too detrimental to the forecast. And then up here, eastern Great Lakes, eastern Ohio, western Pennsylvania, New York, going to be tough there with all this low cloud cover that should be stubborn through the day. And then again, looking good up here in the New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine corridor. So all in all, looking good. Should be a fun afternoon here, getting underway just after 1 p.m. Central Time this afternoon. Going to be a pretty spectacular event. All right, let's take a look at the severe threat now. Again, multiple days of severe weather, potentially significant severe weather on tap starting today across parts of Texas. the SPC has drawn in an enhanced risk level 3 out of 5 in the orange shaded region there. So the areas east of Lubbock, northeast of Midland, including places like Abilene, Wichita Falls, even over toward the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, under the gun for that greatest threat today in the orange shaded area. We do have a slight risk, larger slight risk that extends eastward into the southwest Arkansas, Louisiana corridor, east Texas, and then down in a separate kind of corridor, down the I-35 corridor toward Austin and San Antonio into the Texas Hill Country. So widespread severe weather expected today. All hazards are on the table. We do have a 5% tornado risk that does extend. Basically covers two different regimes. We're going to have the eastern regime, which is along and south of the warm front in the warm advection zone, which could foster a few tornadoes in that corridor from the I-35 corridor eastward into the Arklatex, including the DFW Metroplex. And then for our separate area of supercells expected out here to the west with that enhanced risk, 5% tornado risk there as well. For a little bit better tornadic profile as we go into the evening hours today. But we'll go into that here in just a second. Large hail, certainly going to be the greatest threat today. We have that 30% hashed risk within the enhanced area. Chance for some very large to possibly giant hail with these supercells out there today. But overall, across the entire slight risk area, we do have the threat for some significant severe hail in the yellow shaded region as well, and some damaging wind for today. So all hazards on the table, potentially significant for today. And then we go into tomorrow, which is going to be somewhat of a similar setup. Looks to be a little bit on the messy side, but still the SPC has outlined an enhanced risk, which is an upgrade from yesterday. We had a broad slight risk yesterday. Now we have an enhanced risk level 3 out of 5, basically from the Waco-Austin corridor eastward toward Lufkin, north of Houston over toward western Louisiana, Alexandria, Louisiana, and areas to the west. Under the gun for that greatest severe threat tomorrow, Tuesday, April 9th. Large slight risk extending out from that as well. And the main reason for the upgrade was a 10% hashed tornado risk there for East Texas into western Louisiana, including Alexandria, Louisiana, Lufkin, and areas around there. So the potential for strong tornadoes is there tomorrow, large 2 and 5% areas surrounding that. So the tornado threat certainly is there tomorrow, along with a large hail, 30% hashed area for large hail tomorrow in that enhanced corridor, and damaging wind as well. So pretty significant day on tap for tomorrow. Again, still some questions over the storm mode and how things will progress today into tomorrow. That's going to have a big impact on tomorrow's threat. We'll go into that here in just a second. But we do have that threat for significant severe weather tomorrow. Then we go into day 3, Wednesday, April 10th. And now they've drawn in an enhanced risk there from Louisiana into Mississippi and far southwest Alabama with a 30% hatched area for significant severe. And that could include the threat for tornadoes, perhaps some significant, as well as damaging wind. Again, with these subsequent days, we're going to have to see how the previous day's convection seeps into the following day. That is going to have a major impact on how these events play out. But overall, the threat for significant severe weather is there from Louisiana to Mississippi and Alabama on Wednesday. And then Thursday, we continue that threat in a bimodal distribution. One area down here with the continuation of the southern U.S. severe threat from Florida into the Carolinas, and then a separate area that has come to fruition across parts of Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia, places that were hit hard by last week's severe weather event on April 2nd, under the gun again for that threat on Thursday. Still quite a bit of discrepancy for the farther we go into this period, so we're going to focus on the Monday, Tuesday threat in this video, and then go into a little bit on Wednesday and Thursday as we go toward the end of this video. So let's go ahead and dive in here. We'll take a look at our current mesoanalysis 500 millibar map. And there's our trough here over the desert southwest, starting to dig down. That is going to be our main forcing mechanism for severe storms, especially for the Tuesday through Thursday time frame. This trough is going to start to traverse the southern U.S., and that'll be our main forcing mechanism for the Tuesday through Thursday time frame. But for today, we're just going to be within this broad southwesterly flow regime out ahead of this trough. This trough is going to kind of just meander there across the desert southwest, become a little bit of a cutoff, closed circulation there, and we'll just be within this broad southwest flow out ahead of it. And we'll have a few little kinks there rotating through the flow, but overall, we're not going to be really influenced by this trough until tomorrow. But this is going to be our main forcing mechanism going into the next several days, is this trough in the southwest. Going down to the surface, we've seen a little bit of a surface response this morning. Just a broad overall surface response here. Broad cyclonic flow there across western Mexico into the desert southwest and west Texas. That is expected to at least somewhat consolidate a little bit there across eastern New Mexico, west Texas today, and that'll help really start to push make that flow turn out of the southeast and really strengthen that flow to help really push that moisture northward into the region. We talked about this yesterday, that we already have our moisture really in place for this event, and it's not going to take much to get that moisture over a broad region here of the southern U.S. Here is our current surface data, and you can see exactly the case there, why that's the case there. 60s dew points all the way up to the Arklatex toward the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. I'm just roughly drawing in our 60-degree dew point line somewhere in this region here. And so broad area of 60s to 70s dew points across the southern half of Texas, going to continue to make its way northward going into the day today, out ahead of this developing surface low. You can already kind of see the broad cyclonic circulation out here. The winds will continue to turn out of the southeast and push that moisture northward going into the day today, with better moisture situated out here off to the east, where we're kind of really already seeing these upper 60s to 70s dew points. We're going to have a little bit less moisture out here to the west, where our enhanced risk is for today, but we're going to have enough to support a severe threat. That might increase a little bit going into the evening hours today. But looking good as far as the low-level moisture goes for this setup. Let's take a look at some soundings now. This is the 12Z, 7 a.m. Central Daylight Time, Fort Worth observed sounding. And you can see why we're dealing with some cloud cover as far as the eclipse goes. Some cirrus here in the upper levels, a little bit of that saturated layer in the upper levels, that temperature dew point spread or dew point depression, less than about 5 degrees Celsius up there, between about 200 and 300 millibars, indicative of some cirrus. And then down here in the low levels, pretty saturated low levels as well, indicative of some low clouds. So that's why we're dealing with some clouds across Texas. But from a severe perspective, quite a bit of dry air aloft at this point. That is expected to change as we go into the day today. We're going to moisten a little bit. We're definitely north of the overall warm sector at this point across Dallas-Fort Worth this morning, 57 over 41. So definitely north of the best moisture there at Dallas this morning. But we are expected to that it's going to change as we go into the afternoon, as that moisture continues to stream northward and we get some sunshine there, some breaks in the clouds, hopefully from an eclipse perspective, but also for a severe weather perspective that might help destabilize the atmosphere. We already have a bit of elevated instability at this point, but that is expected to change going into the afternoon. Deep layer shear on the weak side, well ahead of that developing trough, but that should change as well as we go into the afternoon today, as a little bit stronger flow starts to overspread the region aloft, leading to stronger deep layer shear for supercells. Going down to the south, going toward Corpus Christi, this will be in our warm sector, 73 over 73 there at the surface. Not a hugely deep moist layer there, but that should deepen as we go into the day today. Some drier air, steeper lapse rates aloft, indicative of possibly an elevated mixed layer there that has overspread the region. That layer of warm, dry, well-mixed air over the western Mexico, desert southwest, higher terrain there out west, being advected eastward atop the moist layer, helping to destabilize the atmosphere going into the afternoon. So already plenty of instability down there that is going to be advecting northward into parts of west and north central Texas going into the afternoon. Deep layer shear a little bit stronger here to the south, with that belt of stronger flow situated just off to the south here of the North Texas region this morning. Out to the west, you can also see some evidence of that elevated mixed layer there, a layer of very steep lapse rates aloft there at Del Rio this morning. That, again, is going to continue to advect northeastward atop the moist layer to allow for some nice destabilization going into the afternoon. All right, let's look at some model data here. This is the 12Z NAM coming in as we speak this morning. So here's our trough, initialized at 500 millibars right there off the desert southwest, Great Basin area. Going to continue to dig down and kind of just meander there across the southwest today. Not really take a whole lot of eastward motion going into the afternoon today, but this is why deep layer shear is expected to increase across this region. We're expecting this plume of slightly stronger flow to overspread parts of Texas, especially southern and eastern Texas. Here across the western portions of the risk area in that enhanced, a little bit less deep layer flow aloft, but plenty of deep layer shear, some veering, definitely some veering of those winds with height. You can imagine ahead of the developing surface low, winds out of the southeast, veering to southwesterly as we go into the upper levels. Plenty of deep layer shear for supercells. Low-level shear is expected to remain fairly weak through much of the day, but we could see that change as we go into the evening hours, given a nocturnal increase in the low-level jet and a little bit better moisture making its way in after dark. Let's go down to the surface. And this is going to be an event, I'll mention this now, this is going to be an event where going to be an event today where we're going to see multiple rounds of convection into tomorrow morning. So all these areas under the gun today are probably going to see some form of severe weather. Again, that broad area of severe weather risk for today. Plenty of severe weather to go around, and we'll have multiple rounds of storms. We'll try to cover those here as we go into this video, but overall, The enhanced risk is going to be where that main threat is going to be, but we'll have multiple rounds traversing the risk areas here going into tomorrow morning, and then we'll be on tap for tomorrow's threat. So with that out of the way, let's get back to the surface data here. So we'll go into the afternoon. That surface low tries to strengthen a little bit across West Texas. I'll zoom in here to our Southern Plains sector. And again, just a broad surface circulation at this point. That is expected to at least try to tighten up going into the afternoon hours today. This is at 4 p.m. This is at 7 p.m. Broad surface low out here across West Texas, southeast New Mexico. So not really a huge focus for severe weather necessarily. Out to the west, we will have that moisture starting to feed in ahead of the dry line, but again, it'll be weaker moisture out here, at least initially. Better moisture much farther to the east, south of the warm front. Our surface low somewhere out in here. Warm front draped, looking like it's going to be draped somewhere in, a little bit tough to tell. Again, yesterday we talked about how you can have these kind of your synoptic scale warm front, which looks to be perhaps something like this, maybe mixed with the cold front from the low to the north. And then you'll have kind of what's called a marine front south of that synoptic scale warm front on the leading edge of these stronger moisture returns. So there's your synoptic warm front, and we may have a little bit more of a kind of marine front down here, just kind of depicting the boundary between the 70s dew points to the south and a little bit less moisture to the north. So a little bit tough to tell, kind of a nebulous surface pattern, usually not all that favorable. You like to see those really defined boundaries, really well-defined surface low for that robust severe threat. But overall, we do have enough ingredients for a severe threat. Just might not be all that focused, and that's why we're going to see multiple rounds of severe storms. Might be a little bit on the messy side with this setup, but overall, plenty of ingredients for severe storms here going into the afternoon. Given that we'll have perhaps a little bit of a wave rotating through the flow, let's look here at 700 millibars, a little bit of a kink. As I said earlier, some kinks rotating through the flow that might locally help enhance the forcing for ascent in this kind of broad southwesterly flow regime. Here at 700 millibars, we can depict those pretty well. 21Z here, a little bit of a kink in the flow impinging upon West Texas, South Texas as well. That might be your initial forcing mechanism for severe storms in this environment. So storms will probably get going probably around 4 p.m. or so today. I've had a lot of questions about if the eclipse will impact destabilization today. I don't think so, because storm initiation will be well after the eclipse ends. And so we should be well past the impacts, the thermodynamic impacts of the eclipse in this region. So this shortwave should be enough to initiate storms. Not going to take much to really destabilize the atmosphere as that moisture continues to stream northward. So we should see storms initiate kind of in tandem out here in the western areas along the dry line and out to the east in that kind of warm advection regime south of the warm front. So let's take a few soundings here. We'll take a look at our moisture. Initially going to be fairly weak out here to the west, dew points in the 50s. This may be a little bit on the high side. The NAM likes to undermix here, given we'll probably see some ample sunshine out here to the west, away from this kind of real thick low-level cloud deck out here. We'll see some ample sunshine. That should allow for destabilization out here and perhaps some mixing out of the dew points, although we will have strong warm advection through the day that could offset that a little bit. But initially, moisture is expected to be pretty weak out to the west here. Definitely not strong enough moisture for at least an initial tornado threat with these storms. So we'll take a sounding out here. You can see that where the dry line is out here to the west. These storms are expected to be much more discrete out here, given quite a bit better perpendicularity with the shear vectors with respect to the initiating boundary, which is the dry line. So we'll take a sounding out here in our western regime, and then we'll take one out here in the open warm sector, south of the warm front there in East Texas, where we're expecting to see that warm advection regime take place. So here we are out west. You can see a very well-mixed boundary layer. 75 degrees out here to the west. I tend to think that's quite a bit underdone. Classic NAM, low-level thermo bias. So would expect to see temperatures closer to 80 degrees out there, perhaps even higher. So that would lead to pretty high temperature dew point spreads at the surface, well-mixed air, leading to a tendency for storms to be a little bit more outflow dominant initially in the first few hours of their life cycle. But plenty of instability here, over 2,000 joules per kilogram mixed layer cape. Still lots of dry air aloft here in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere, so that could allow force updrafts to perhaps struggle a little bit initially before the forcing really starts to move in. So we'll have to watch that for sure, but plenty of instability and deep layer shear for supercells, bulk shear about 50 knots, but limited, very, very limited low-level shear initially with this setup. So that should lead to that large to significant hail threat. Ample instability, large deep layer shear, but very limited low-level shear. Classic combination for large to very large hail. So that is going to be the main threat with storms out there. Damaging winds, given some tendency for these storms to produce strong outflow, given the dry air aloft and the high temperature dew point spreads at the surface, and very large to giant hail. Out to the east here, we are going to see a limited low-level jet throughout the day, so the hail threat's probably going to be pretty prominent out to the east as well in that warm convection regime, especially with any more discrete supercells. Plenty of instability out here, 3,300 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE. Better moisture out here, 85 over 70 at the surface there, so very juicy low-level air mass, but low-level shear going to remain weak for much of the day out here in the open warm sector, but still strong deep layer shear for supercells will foster that large to very large hail threat in the open warm sector regime as well. Then we go closer to 0Z. You can see that 60s dew point line kind of creeping off to the northwest. So those storms that form out here on the dry line, at least for the first few hours of their life cycle, going to be in fairly limited moisture, but eventually, if they can persist and remain surface-based into the evening hours, we'll start to see a little bit of an increase in moisture for those storms to work with as those 60 dew points make their way out to the east. We'll still have plenty of rich moisture out here to the west, excuse me. Out here to the east, we'll have plenty of moisture for those storms to work with throughout the event. And so therefore we will see probably an increase in the overall tendency for the tornado threat here going into the evening hours as that low-level jet starts to ramp up going into the evening hours. But for much of the day it will remain weak, and therefore we'll have mostly just a large hail and damaging wind threat with those storms going into the afternoon hours. Then by evening we'll start to see a ramp up here. Here we are at 0Z. I'll take a sounding here just to a little bit better moisture to the east. Out here to the east, out here to the west, out here to the east, we'll take a sounding as well. So here we are out to the west, still very limited low-level shear. So I don't really see much of a tornado threat developing out here in the western target. I think it will be mostly a large hail threat given very, very weak low-level shear. You can see not much curvature there in the low levels of the hodograph. So that will lead to very straight hodographs favorable for large hail. Out to the east, we're starting to see a little bit more of veering of the low-level winds with height, a little bit of a wonky thermal profile there, maybe some convective impacts. But overall, the low-level jet is going to start ramping up going into the evening hours out here across parts of East Texas. So we'll have to watch for that tornado threat ramping up as we go into the evening hours tonight. Especially with any more discrete supercells. And there you go, a lot better curvature there in the low levels of the hodograph. Plenty of low-level shear for tornadic supercells at this point. But I do expect it to be a little bit messy given the warm front here. That marine front going to be kind of the boundary along which storms will train. Shear vector is very much parallel to that boundary. So we should have a little bit more messy convection. Several rounds of warm convection storms moving up should foster a little bit more of a messy storm mode. And therefore perhaps more of a damaging wind threat, but also a few tornadoes possible in this regime out to the east. Low-level shear expected to remain pretty weak off to the west as well for a while. So I think large hail still going to be the main threat out there. We'll see as the main trough starts to push its way east. I'll go back and zoom out here to our CONUS sector here. So going into the overnight hours tonight, that trough is going to push east. We'll have several ripples in the flow moving out to ahead of it, and that will allow for multiple rounds of convection to fire out here across the dry line, and then continued warm convection out here across the east as we go into tomorrow morning. We'll have kind of a conglomeration of convection probably out here near and south of the warm front. Could foster that all hazards, mostly damaging wind and tornado threat going into the morning tomorrow before renewed development occurs to the south of that area. Going into the afternoon on Tuesday. So that trough again going to continue to swing off to the east going into tomorrow, and we'll really start to feel the impacts of that trough moving into tomorrow afternoon as it approaches the area. Nice belt of stronger flow in the exit region, nicely kind of a neutrally tilted trough, plenty of forcing for ascent in this environment. And again, we'll have convection ongoing in the morning, and that is going to complicate the forecast. We won't really know 100% how the forecast will play out for tomorrow until we get some more data on the convection going into tomorrow morning and early afternoon. But we'll have plenty of deep layer shear for supercells, and that moisture will continue to stream northward out ahead of the developing surface low out here across parts of West Texas. So here is the surface low this evening. Surface pattern continues in a broad fashion, broad surface low going into tomorrow. Not a ton of deepening of that surface low here, just very broad surface cyclone across southwest Texas into central Mexico. Again, so not really a huge focus here for severe storms. Now, here is our warm front, and is likely to be very much outflow reinforced. That means these storms going on in the morning hours are going to continue to produce outflow along and north of the front, and that will help push the front south. And I've seen this a lot in these setups where sometimes you'll have a lot of convection producing a lot of outflow to the north of the front, and that could allow for that front to just continue to sag south a little bit. So it's all going to depend on how much convection and how much outflow occurs tomorrow morning, and that will really base the northern extent of the severe threat tomorrow here across South Texas. The SPC believes it's going to be across that enhanced risk area we showed earlier, down here across East Texas into western Louisiana. But again, the lines are probably going to change into tomorrow morning when we have a little bit better idea of how the convection will continue into Tuesday. But overall, plenty of southerly flow within that warm sector, likely a very broad warm sector out here ahead of the surface low, and you can see what happens to that warm front. Lots of convection north of it. The northern extent of that warm sector is the warm front. Continues to sag down to the south. The NAM does have it becoming pretty stationary by mid-afternoon or so. This is at 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time tomorrow. Warm front located off here. That will again demarcate the northern extent of the severe threat. Dry line out here. Much better moisture along the dry line now. 60s and 70s dew points. So very rich moisture over a broad area. Plenty of real estate for severe storms. But given a somewhat weaker low-level response, would expect the low-level jet to remain fairly weak across this region, except in areas out to the east. So we'll have to watch that. Out here to the east, where our low-level jet plume will be, out to the west along the actual dry line, where we are expecting additional storm development to take place, the low-level shear is expected to remain fairly weak. So any storms that fire along the dry line out here to the west going to foster that mostly large hail and damaging wind threat, given very, very limited low-level shear. You can see here thermodynamics still need to be worked out here tomorrow, and this is all not really all that favorable. Honestly, very shallow moisture beneath very dry air aloft, so updrafts would definitely struggle in this kind of environment with a little bit of capping as well. But if storms do fire along the dry line, very limited low-level shear for them to work with. So any storms that do persist along the dry line would have that large hail and damaging wind threat, very minimal tornado threat. Now, out here in the open warm sector tomorrow, and again, we're mostly going to be fueled by that strong warm advection out in East Texas tomorrow. We're going to have to watch for that tornado threat. Now, we are expecting to see a little bit of some thermodynamic issues going into the afternoon tomorrow, which may put a little bit of a damper on things as far as the overall threat goes. You can see here at about 700 millibars, a little bit of a warm nose there persisting into the afternoon. Very saturated low levels as well. Very deep moisture, which is favorable for severe storms. But a little bit of an issue there in the mid levels of the atmosphere, right around 700 millibars. A little bit of a stubborn warm nose there hanging on. So that could thwart overall robustness of the updrafts going into the afternoon tomorrow. But look at that wind profile. Very intense low-level shear with that stronger low-level jet, over 400 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity. So any discrete supercells that can become mature in this environment, and again, that's a big if in the afternoon tomorrow, given this warm nose here and the thermo issues aloft, they would have the threat for producing tornadoes, perhaps some strong, given such strong low-level and deep layer shear, and perhaps a somewhat discrete mode, at least initially in the warm sector regime, open warm air advection regime in the open warm sector. By 0Z, we'll see if that changes at all. We'll take a sounding here along the dry line and then one out to the East Texas there, piney woods. Definitely not your favored chase terrain for sure. So out to the west, that low-level shear weakness definitely continues into the evening hours. So again, any storms that do fire along the dry line, I think would have the potential to struggle a little bit given so much dry air aloft and shallow moisture, but very limited low-level shear would foster a large hail threat with those storms. Out here by 0Z, still that little bit of a warm nose is hanging on. SPC does expect that to erode by about 0Z, so this could be just a NAM bias. So assuming that the warm nose does erode by this point, we would see a little bit of a better threat for more robust updrafts, but by then the storm mode might start to deteriorate, and we'll have multiple rounds of warm advection storms and some storms along the warm front. Just an overall a lot of convection to deal with, meaning a lot of storms, a lot of interactions among those storms, and therefore perhaps more of a damaging wind threat that might impede the overall tornado and strong tornado threat. It's all going to depend on storm mode, but any more discrete updrafts in this kind of environment, assuming full destabilization here, would foster a threat for tornadoes, perhaps some strong, given very strong low-level shear. So that is Tuesday. We'll have convection going into Wednesday as well. And again, what happens on Tuesday is really going to impact what happens on Wednesday. We're just not quite sure yet, but the SPC does see, and you can see a lot of convection here to the north of the warm front, eating out at those dew points there. That's a huge cratering of the dew points, likely due to elevated convection north of the warm front. And how much convection we have on Tuesday into Wednesday, going to denote that northern edge of the warm sector. The NAM has it pretty far south here across central Louisiana, central Mississippi, southward. Here, right there's Jackson, Mississippi. So really Alexandria to Jackson, southward, but plenty of moisture here to the south of that front. We'll just have to monitor how much convection occurs to the north of the front. But very strong winds are expected, or very strong wind profiles expected to maintain into Wednesday. You can see a very strong low-level jet there, especially across parts of Mississippi, eastern Louisiana and Mississippi going into the afternoon on Wednesday. That would foster likely a threat for significant severe weather, perhaps significant tornadoes, especially with any ongoing convection Tuesday into Wednesday. Perhaps some renewed development here along the cold front dry line back to the west across East Texas, but again, the low-level jet very, very weak back there, so that would foster more of a large hail and damaging wind threat. Our main threat would be out here in the open warm sector with persistent convection going into Wednesday afternoon from the Tuesday round. Plenty of instability, strong low-level and deep layer shear for organized severe weather, so that would support that significant severe threat. But again, it's all going to depend on what happens Tuesday to give us a better idea what's going to happen Wednesday, but certainly the environment is favorable if we can get convection to persist into eastern Louisiana and Mississippi for that significant damaging wind and tornado threat. Large hail, not going to be too much of an issue unless we get redevelopment along the dry line back in East Texas into western Louisiana. And then on Thursday, we'll take a look at the GFS here real quick just to give you an idea what's going to happen a little bit farther out. The trough does take on a nice neutral tilt. That's why we're going to see a little bit of an increase in the wind fields out here for Wednesday. A little bit better low-level response there on Wednesday as well. I'll take a look at the NAM here real quick, and you'll see a little bit of a deeper surface low start to develop there across the Gulf Coast states. A little bit of a more robust low-level response, given a stronger mid and upper-level response with that trough. Nice looking trough there spreading across the area. Then we go into the Thursday time frame when it starts to take on a little bit more of a negative tilt. Pretty classic looking trough here for the continuation of that severe threat into the southeast, and then a separate area up here into the Ohio Valley perhaps. Let's take a look at our surface progression here. So we see a very tight surface low developing with this trough aloft. Very strong low-level response Wednesday into Thursday as that trough takes on a much more favorable geometry than it has on Monday and Tuesday. So here we are on Wednesday morning. Nice tight surface low there across the Arklatex region, and then continues to eject off to the northeast, and that would foster a severe threat up to the north on the surface low up there in parts of Ohio, Kentucky. We'll zoom in here, dew points, see how our moisture responds as well. Would expect pretty strong advection up there into that region, at least probably 50s, upper 50s to 60s dew points up into the Ohio region for Wednesday, for the Thursday event, which would foster a severe threat. So not expecting too much of an issue in getting that moisture up there given such a strong low-level response. Here we are on Tuesday. Plenty of moisture down there for the Texas portion of the threat. Then Wednesday, that moisture starts to shift off to the east. The warm sector shifts off to the east as the low shifts off to the east, and then plenty of moisture there for Thursday up to the north. GFS is a little bit, I don't usually trust the GFS at this range for its depiction of moisture. It's usually just not all that good, but we do have at least some 60 dew points making its way up there on the surface low, which would foster a severe threat up there. Let's take a sounding from that area, and we'll see what the environment looks like. Don't pay too much attention to the specifics of the overall profiles. We're just trying to get an overall general idea of what the environment might look like up here. We do see low instability, but enough for severe storms, about 600 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE. Plenty of low-level shear for a perhaps tornado threat up there. Tornado and damaging wind threat, about 200 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity. A lot of speed shear in the low levels, not a ton of turning or veering of the winds with height. That usually doesn't matter a whole lot up in the Ohio area. That is a pretty classic looking photograph for the Ohio area. A lot more speed shear, changing of the wind speed with height rather than turning of those winds with height, directional shear. Strong deep layer shear for an organized severe threat as well. And then down in the southeast, you can see here on the GFS, that's why I don't trust the GFS too much. It has the threat really out into the Atlantic, not really inland there by 18Z even. on the early afternoon of Thursday, whereas I'm sure some of the other models will come in a little bit slower with the progression of the trough, but still should have plenty of instability there going into Thursday morning and afternoon for a severe threat there, Alabama, Georgia, into the Carolinas. But again, we're going to have to wait and see how Wednesday plays out to know how Thursday is going to play out as well. So overall, a very complex severe threat. Let's take one last look here at the convection allowing models for today's threat and perhaps tomorrow. This is the 12Z HER. So just to give us a decent idea of what the radar might look like later on this afternoon. So you can see going into the afternoon hours today, we start to see some robust updrafts as early as about 17 to 18 Z there across the southeast Texas portion of the event. Some more robust supercells in there. Again, they would have that large hail threat, large to very large hail threat out here, given very limited low-level shear. And then we start to see initiation out here to the west, east of the Lubbock area, northeast of Midland, probably near the post-Texas area right in there. And then they will move off quickly to the northeast. Again, these will be more discrete supercells, given a little bit better orientation of the shear vectors with respect to the dry line. So that will favor a longer durations discrete mode. And then this is when things will get interesting. If we can persist discrete storms here into this area where 60s dew points start to increase a little bit, we may have a little bit of an increased threat for a few tornadoes out here ahead of these storms, given a little bit better low-level moisture in comparison to earlier when the temperature dew point spreads are going to be pretty high out there where they initiate. And they'll probably be outflow dominant for quite a while. Again, I'm still a little skeptical because of the weaker low-level shear. The low-level jet increase is still displaced off to the east a little bit. And this is at 3Z on the HER, which is 10 p.m. So definitely getting pretty late here, but we do still see the persistence of discrete supercells. And if they can remain surface-based, perhaps a threat for a tornado or two. But overall, I think that it's going to mainly be a large hail and damaging wind risk there, perhaps transitioning to mostly a large hail threat as they perhaps become a little bit more elevated with time going into the morning hours tomorrow. And then you can see an additional round of convection out here to the west forming along the dry line as the additional forcing moves in. Overall, just a lot of convection here. A lot of convection producing a lot of outflow north of the warm front. And again, that's going to reinforce the warm front. If these continue to produce outflow throughout the day, again, that warm front may continue to sag. And we'll see a little bit farther south extent of that warm sector. We do see a lot of convection here going into Tuesday to the north. And again, this probably will be north of the warm front, I would guess. So this is at 17Z, forecast hour 29. Just going to look here. A lot of convection here across North Texas. That would be, I would guess, probably going to be elevated north of the front. And so, yeah, looks like your warm front is down here. And then your convection mostly is up in here. So that would be elevated north of the front, and that's your problem here. And that's why we just don't know exactly where that the greatest threat is going to set up for Tuesday afternoon, because if we have all this convection producing outflow north of the front, that front is going to continue to surge southward. I've seen this time and time again where you have a nice-looking setup along the warm front and south of it, but you have additional convection in the morning just pushing that front south continually throughout the day. So we're going to have to watch that for sure. But still, plenty of real estate in the open warm sector for a continuation of the severe threat there for any storms that form in that warm advection regime. Strong low-level jet out there, so any storms that do form in the warm advection regime going into Tuesday afternoon would have that tornado threat there. We'll see what the HER shows here once it loads. But overall, just kind of a messy event. Again, not really a focused event with the overall pertinent features, especially at the surface, which I don't usually like at least from a chasing perspective, not really a huge fan of those setups where you don't really have a focus for severe storms, whereas, an event that says, go to the triple point, that's where our best ingredients are, or go along the dry line, that's where your best ingredients are. Here, we're just going to have multiple rounds of convection, kind of an unfocused area of multiple rounds of severe storms, and that is not all that favorable for a really robust tornado threat. This doesn't appear to be loading at this point, so let me try to refresh it here. Going off my Verizon jetpack, there we go. So here we go into tomorrow, lots of convection north of the front. Tries to develop some to the south of the front, perhaps down here across parts of east central Texas. Those would foster a tornado threat if they are surface-based along and south of the warm front. But just a lot of convection here, multiple rounds of convection going into Wednesday morning. Overall, just a very, very messy event, and that's what's the problem with forecasting Wednesday at this point. While the ceiling is high, with very strong looking profiles. We just don't know how the convection is going to persist, and that looks to be pretty messy convection going into Wednesday morning, at least on this run of the HRRR. Let's look at one more model, a couple more models here, the WRF ARW model, just to look at a little bit more of get a more multi-model look here at things. So this is the ARW model. We'll just kind of look at today's event here going into tomorrow. You see some supercells start to develop there along the southeast Texas coast near the Corpus Christi area by as early as 17 to 18 Z, so right about lunchtime or so, early afternoon. Then we see that spread northward, some messier convection there along the south of the warm front, and then some more discrete supercells out here in northwest Texas there would foster that large hail threat and perhaps a little bit of an increasing threat for a tornado or two going into the early evening hours, and then things kind of get really messy into tomorrow, and some additional development going into tomorrow morning would foster that all hazards threat there. NSSL WRF model. This will be the last one that we look at before we wrap things up here. So let's look at the NSSL WRF and see what it has for today and tomorrow. So this is just another model we like to use. Again, take these with a grain of salt. In these kind of nebulous forcing regimes, the cams don't often do that great of a job at depicting the convection and how it will the atmosphere will react to that convection. So take these solutions with a grain of salt, but at least it gives us a basic idea of what we might expect this afternoon. So again, warm advection supercells forming in southeast and east Texas going into the afternoon. Additional development along the dry line out to the west there. This is a little bit farther to the east. I think will favor a little bit more of a NAM solution where the dry line's a little bit farther west, so storms will probably form farther to the west, closer to the Lubbock area, probably east of the Lubbock area, closer to the post-Texas kind of corridor there, and then move off to the northeast. But again, discrete supercells out there to the west with that large hail and damaging wind threat. And then messy convection into the day on Tuesday. The NSSL WRF pretty lackluster there as far as the solution goes. So, and again, that'll probably be due to all of this convection in the warm sector in the morning and early afternoon hours on Tuesday. So again, we're going to have to watch that and see how that plays out to really get an idea of how the Tuesday threat will play out. So that's going to do it for this video. A lot to talk about today. Again, for those of you trying to view the eclipse, good luck this afternoon. Hopefully you are blessed with clear skies. I do see that for a decent portion of the path. Again, we're going to have to watch that cirrus perhaps overspreading the area this afternoon or this morning into the afternoon. But overall, looking pretty good at this point for folks here from Arkansas into Missouri, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, and then up here into the northeast looking pretty good as well. And then we will get to our severe threat after that. Enhanced risk there, level 3 out of 5 for west central Texas into northwest Texas, places like Wichita Falls, Abilene, over toward the DFW Metroplex. All hazards on the table for today in that regime out there, but mostly a large hail and damaging wind threat, with the tornado threat confined out to the east a little bit more with the stronger low-level shear after dark. There's your tornado threat, damaging wind, and large hail threat going to be the main threat with today's setup. Then we go into tomorrow. Again, going to have to watch what happens with today's convection going into tomorrow to really see what's going to happen for Tuesday. But the SPC does have an enhanced risk level 3 out of 5 there for southeast and east Texas into western Louisiana for that tornado threat, perhaps strong tornado threat that may develop there in east Texas and western Louisiana with some damaging wind and large to very large hail there. And then the threat continues into Wednesday. Again, very unsure how that's going to play out given the Tuesday convection. But they do have an enhanced risk there for some significant severe weather, Louisiana, Mississippi, western Alabama, and then the bimodal threat possible on Thursday as the threat shifts east, as the trough takes on a little bit better geometry for perhaps a stronger low-level response and a continuation of the tornado threat into Thursday. So that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.